You walk into a brightly lit building. You pick up a box of food. You hand over a piece of colored paper. The person behind the counter nods. You walk out with your survival secured for another week. Does it ever strike you how bizarre this ritual actually is? For 99% of human history, this transaction would have made absolutely no sense. Your ancestors did not have paper bills. They did not have coins. They did not even use the concept of money. So how did you survive in a world without currency? How did ancient humans get what they needed when they had nothing to pay with? The answer changes everything you think you know about human nature. It destroys the stories you were taught in school. You have probably heard the traditional story of ancient economics. It goes like this. You have a pile of animal skins. Your neighbor has a pile of arrowheads. You need arrows to hunt. Your neighbor needs skins to stay warm. You sit down and negotiate a fair trade. You swap 2 skins for 10 arrows. Everyone walks away happy. It sounds perfectly logical. It sounds completely rational. This system is called barter. Economists have used this exact story for centuries to explain how human societies functioned before money was invented. Adam Smith wrote about it in his famous book The Wealth of Nations. It is the foundation of modern economic theory. But there is a massive problem with this story. It never actually happened. No one has ever found a society that relied purely on barter. Why is this the case? Imagine trying to live this way. You need shoes, so you bring your extra fish to the cobbler. But the cobbler does not want fish. He wants firewood. Now you have to find someone who has firewood and wants fish, just so you can trade for the wood to give to the cobbler for the shoes. It is exhausting. It is wildly inefficient. Anthropologist Caroline Humphreys studied economies around the world and came to a definitive conclusion. No example of a pure barter economy has ever been described in history or ethnography. So if they were not bartering, what were your ancestors doing? How did goods move across the ancient world? The truth is much more complex and deeply rooted in human psychology. Your ancestors operated on a system of mutual obligation. It is often called the gift economy. But this is not about giving presents on a birthday. It is a profound web of social debt. David Graeber, an anthropologist who wrote the book Debt, The First 5,000 Years, explains that ancient communities did not calculate exact values. If you needed something, you simply asked for it. If your neighbor had extra arrows, they gave them to you. There was no immediate exchange. There was no haggling over worth. You just took the arrows. But now you owed them. You owed them your help, your resources, or your loyalty in the future. Have you ever considered how powerful an unspoken debt can be? This system was the glue that held prehistoric societies together. Let us recreate a typical day in the Pleistocene epoch to see this in action. You are a hunter returning to your camp. You have just taken down a massive antelope. You have hundreds of pounds of meat. You do not have a refrigerator. You cannot possibly eat all this meat yourself before it spoils. So what do? You give it away. You distribute it to every single person in your band. You do not ask for anything in return. You do not expect them to hand you berries or tools right then and there. By giving the meat away, you are storing your surplus energy in the bellies of your neighbors. What is the ultimate return on this investment? The return is survival. Next week, you might fail to catch anything. You might come back empty-handed and hungry. But someone else in the camp will succeed, and they will share their meat with you because they remember what you did. You are banking goodwill. This is not just a theory. Anthropologist Richard Lee documented this exact behavior in his 1969 study of the Jew/Hoansi people of the Kalahari Desert. He observed how hunters shared their kills meticulously. But he also noticed something incredibly strange. When a hunter brought back a massive kill, the community did not praise him. They actively insulted him. They told him the meat was skinny. They told him it was tough and barely worth eating. Why would they insult the person feeding them? Lee discovered that this practice, known as insulting the meat, was a deliberate social tool. It was designed to prevent arrogance. If a hunter was praised too much, he might start thinking he was better than everyone else. He might demand a leadership role. He might try to establish a hierarchy. By mocking the kill, the group kept his ego in check. They maintained perfect equality. Have you ever noticed how modern friend groups often mock each other to keep everyone grounded? Your ancestors did the same thing to ensure their survival. They valued social harmony far more than individual wealth. Anthropologist James Sussman points out in his work, Affluence Without Abundance, that ancient humans viewed their environment as inherently giving. They did not feel the need to hoard. Hoarding was actually dangerous. Hoarding meant you were not sharing, and not sharing meant you were breaking the social fabric. In a world with predators and harsh winters, being alienated from your group was a death sentence. But this gift economy did not just exist within small local bands. It stretched across vast, incredible distances. Your ancestors traded items across entire continents. We know this because of archaeology. Let us look at the evidence. Anthropologist Polly Wiesner spent decades studying a network called the Hexero Exchange. This network spans thousands of miles across southern Africa. It involves the exchange of non-essential items like beautifully crafted ostrich eggshell beads. Why would people walk for weeks across a brutal desert just to give someone a necklace? The beads themselves were not the point. The beads were a physical manifestation of a relationship. By giving a gift to someone in a distant camp, you were forging a bond. If a drought hit your territory, you could travel to your Hexero partner's camp and seek refuge. The bead was your insurance policy. It was a tangible reminder that you were connected. We see evidence of these sprawling networks deep in the archaeological record. Consider the trade of obsidian during the Neolithic period. Obsidian is a black volcanic glass. It is incredibly sharp. It is the perfect material for making cutting tools. But it is only found near specific volcanoes. How did ancient people living hundreds of miles away acquire it? Archaeologist Colin Renfrew used a technique called trace element analysis to track the movement of obsidian. He looked at the chemical signature of obsidian blades found in villages in the Levant. He traced them back to their exact source volcanoes in Cappadocia, modern-day Turkey. The distance between the source and the villages was staggering. Did a single merchant carry a sack of obsidian across the mountains? The obsidian moved through a process called down-the-line trade. One village chipped off what they needed and passed the rest to the next village. The next village took a share and passed it on. It moved hand to hand, camp to camp, across thousands of miles. Can you imagine holding a stone blade that has passed through 100 different hands before reaching yours? Every time that obsidian changed hands, a relationship was honored. A debt was acknowledged. A social tie was strengthened. Trade was not about maximizing profit. Trade was about minimizing risk. It was about building a web of human connections that could catch you when you fell. This was the reality of human economics for hundreds of thousands of years. But then, something shifted. About 10,000 years ago, the world began to warm. The ice retreated. Your ancestors started doing something radical. They stopped moving. They settled down. They began planting seeds in the ground. They invented agriculture. This single decision destroyed the ancient gift economy. Why did farming change everything? Farming created something humanity had never truly dealt with before. It created massive, permanent surplus. You could harvest tons of grain and store it in silos. You no longer needed to share everything immediately to prevent it from rotting. You could lock it away. You could hoard it. And with hoarding came inequality. Some people had full silos. Some people had empty silos. The people with empty silos had to borrow from the people with full silos. For the first time in human history, debt was no longer a warm social bond. Debt became a weapon. If you could not pay back the grain you borrowed, you had to give up your land. You had to give up your labor. You had to give up your freedom. How does it feel to know that agriculture, the foundation of modern civilization, was the very thing that created poverty? As settlements grew into massive cities like Uruk in ancient Mesopotamia, the old ways of simply remembering who owed what became impossible. You cannot keep track of 1,000 different debts in your head. The system was breaking down. People needed a way to record transactions permanently. Archaeologist Denise Schmant-Besserat made a groundbreaking discovery about how they solved this. She studied thousands of tiny clay tokens found across the Middle East. For decades, Researchers thought these tokens were just toys or game pieces. But Schmant-Besserat realized they were an accounting system. A cone token represented a measure of grain. A sphere represented an animal. When a farmer brought grain to the temple, the priests pressed these tokens into wet clay to record the deposit. This was the birth of writing. It was the birth of bureaucracy. It was the moment human interaction became cold and mathematical. The exact value of a sheep was calculated against the exact value of a basket of wheat. The spirit of the gift economy was dead. Transactions were no longer about building lifelong relationships. They were about settling a ledger. You handed over your goods, you received your tokens, and you walked away clean. There was no lingering connection. There was no mutual obligation. Money, in its earliest conceptual form, was invented to allow people to interact without having to care about each other. It replaced trust with mathematics. Do you see how profound that shift really is? You went from a world where your survival depended on your reputation and your generosity to a world where your survival depended purely on your accounting. But here is the most fascinating part of this entire story. Despite thousands of years of coins, paper money, and digital banking, your brain has not forgotten the old ways. Your psychology is still wired for the Pleistocene. You still instinctively operate on the gift economy every single day. Think about your actual life. If a friend helps you move a heavy couch into your new apartment, you do not pull out your wallet and hand them $20. That would be deeply offensive. It would ruin the friendship. Because handing them cash turns a social bond into a commercial transaction. Instead, you buy them a beer. You order them a pizza. You tell them that you owe them one. You are actively maintaining that ancient web of mutual obligation. When you buy a round of drinks at a bar, you do not track the exact cent value of what everyone consumed. You just expect that someone else will buy the next round. Marcel Mauss, a pioneering sociologist, wrote a famous book called The Gift. He argued that gifts are never truly free. They always carry the weight of reciprocity. They bind the giver and the receiver together. When you give a gift, you are giving a piece of yourself. You are weaving a thread between two lives. Your ancestors understood this perfectly. They understood that true wealth was not measured by how much you could hoard in a cave. True wealth was measured by how many people would share their fire with you when the winter came. They traded constantly, but they were not trading objects. They were trading trust. They were trading survival. They were trading humanity. The next time you buy something, look closely at the transaction. You hand over a piece of colored paper. The person behind the counter nods. You walk out with your survival secured for another week.